Welcome everyone to today's webinar. This event is being recorded.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jill Fioravanti. I'm a senior consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading.
No, you see that.
And on behalf of the campaign, it's a pleasure to welcome you today. Thank you so much for joining today's discussion. We have about 75 people registered for this webinar, which is the fourth in the Housing Partner Discussion Series. So we're really excited to have you all be a part of this. If you are coming back from previous Housing Partner discussions, or if this is your first one, welcome to this series of discussions. You can go to the next slide. So I will tell you a little bit about kind of how the agenda is going to work today. The slides and bios are available via links in the chat box. So hopefully everyone can have access to the group chat. You can see the bios of all our speakers, the slides we'll be presenting, and then there's also a note in there that we'd love for you to share your name, your organization, and your location, so we have a sense of where folks are going to be dialing in from and the different perspectives and organizations that you're coming from. So please feel free to do that. We'll also be using the chat feature throughout the webinar to offer you an opportunity to log any questions, observations, or perspectives. And over the course of the webinar, towards more in the last 20 minutes or so, we're going to be calling out some of those questions, and the speakers will have a chance to answer them. And then we'll be giving you a chance to enter questions later on as well. So just please make that as interactive as possible, and we'll be trying to tap into those throughout the next hour and a half. Participants are on mute given the large number of folks on the call. During the Q&A period, if I call on you, you can unmute yourself to ask a question or to elaborate on a question that you noted in the chat box. Right now we have on the screen the agenda, and I'll be highlighting just a bit about how the next 90 minutes are going to go. I'll talk a little bit about the campaign for grade level reading and our work around connections and intersections with housing and how we see it advancing early school success. And then I'm going to be turning it over to our 5 speakers and discussants throughout the hour and a half that represent different national intermediaries and associations that work in this space. And as I mentioned earlier, their bios are included in the link in the group chat. I'll be moderating. I'm also going to be presenting on behalf of Abra Lyons-Warren from the Council of Large Public Housing Authorities. Abra had a predetermined commitment and was very sorry she couldn't be here, but she's prepped me well, and she's provided all the slides for her section of the agenda. So that information, even though it's being spoken by me, it is really coming from her mouth, and I know she really wishes she could be here to be able to present to all of you directly. So on the next slide, the next slide has a little bit about the campaign's work with public housing authorities. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading seeks to disrupt generational poverty by mobilizing communities to find solutions for one of the major obstacles in the pathway out of poverty, which is failure to read proficiently by the end of 3rd grade. So the campaign inspires and motivates communities to do 3 things. First, to put a stake in the ground around a 3rd grade reading goal that's ambitious, achievable, and actionable. Second, to develop a plan to solve the major drivers of 3rd grade reading, which we see as too few young children ready for school, too many students missing too many days of school, and too many children experiencing summer learning loss. And then third, mobilizing critical constituencies to implement those plans, including, but not limited to, parents and caregivers through a 2-generation approach to our work. As of this month, the campaign has more than 300 communities from 45 states, District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and 2 Canadian provinces that are part of our network. We have 4,100 local organizations involved in our sponsoring coalitions, and more than 500 state and local funders that support the work that we do, and that the work that's happening at the community and coalition level. From early on in its inception, the campaign has always recognized the importance of space and place in positively impacting early school success outcomes for kids, and particularly the way that stable housing providers can develop and build relationships with parents of young kids through a two-generation approach. We started our work with a focus on public housing authorities in terms of our connections with places and spaces through relationships with HUD and the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. And we've really expanded that relationship with housing to include meaningful partnerships with CLAFA, the Council of Large Public Housing Authorities, through its Housing Is initiative. And now we're widening that work even further to lift up the roles that a wider umbrella of national nonprofit affordable housing organizations can play in leveraging opportunities to connect housing and education and advance early school success outcomes. This work and this particular group of partners have worked together in different capacities over the years, but formally came together in summer of 2018 through funding from the Funders for Housing and Opportunity and under the facilitation and guidance of HousEd, who you'll be hearing more from in a little bit, to really start building stronger ties to each other and with a focus on looking at outcomes and the different kinds of outcomes that and the different initiatives that these groups were doing that could perhaps learn from each other, leverage from each other, and particularly see if there's any kind of common metrics and goals across our different associations and intermediaries that we could be lifting up. So that's really leading directly to this call today, where we're really excited to give the groups on this call a chance to talk more about their approach to connecting housing and education, both nationally and in the networks that they work with across the country, and give them a chance to also communicate with each other and hear from all of you about how this work aligns with what you're doing on the ground or what you're experiencing from your seats, and hopefully be able to continue this housing education nexus more concretely moving forward. Just a couple other quick things I'll say, and then I want to show you who is on our call today, who's going to be speaking. This is the fourth in a series of a housing partner discussion series that's been hosted by the campaign, where we're lifting up, there's the way that we've approached this leading up to today is lifting up national best-in-class resources and national partnerships, national groups like you'll be hearing from today, looking at cutting-edge research in the field of housing and education and the nexus between those two, and then also showcasing and promoting what's happening locally in campaign coalitions or in other local efforts to advance this work between housing and education. So we look forward to future housing webinar series and hopefully having you on the call as well for those. I think at this point I'm going to turn to our next slide, which is going to show you who you'll be hearing from today. So Nicole Manchester and Alexandra Nassau-Brownstone are both with Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future. They're going to be first up as our discussants, and they'll be talking more about SAFE's work and particularly a couple initiatives that are really exciting and cutting edge to be advancing early school and K-12 outcomes for kids across the network that SAFE manages and works with. Next up will be Clare Rosenberger with NeighborWorks America, another national intermediary that works with nonprofit affordable housing organizations around the country. She'll be talking about NeighborWorks' approach more broadly, about an exciting initiative called iReady, and then what are some kind of secrets of success in NeighborWorks' mind for how to connect housing and education. Next slide. We'll then hear from Jennifer Peck with the Partnership of for Children and Youth, and Jenny Hicks with JVH Empower. Jennifer and Jenny manage and have been moving forward the HousEd initiative, which is based in California, but is working both in California and across a wider geography to really provide tools and resources, particularly with public housing authorities, but increasingly with nonprofit affordable housing organizations as well, to advance a variety of different literacy, family engagement, and early school outcomes for kids. And I'm really excited to have them both on the line. And then lastly, I'll be presenting on behalf of Abra Lyons-Warren with the Council of Large Public Housing Authorities with a focus on the CLAFA's Housing Is initiative that bridges housing, education, and health. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, Alexandra and Nicole. They're going to pop on the video, and I will let them take it from here. Thanks so much.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Alexandra Nassau-Brownstone, and I am seated with Nicole Manchester. We're sharing an office. I'm going to swivel the camera back and forth. But we're thrilled to be a part of this webinar. I wanted to spend just a couple minutes introducing who SAFE is for those of you who aren't familiar. We can go to the next slide. SAFE is a performance-driven collaborative of 13 leading affordable housing organization members with more than 140,000 affordable rental homes across the country. Our members are in 49 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. The one that's not included, everyone always asks, is North Dakota. We're working on it. But we provide housing to over 140,000 residents. And about half of the properties are senior properties, approximately 40% are multifamily or family properties, and the balance is special needs or other supportive populations. SAFE's mission is to advance the creation and preservation of healthy, sustainable, affordable rental homes that foster equity, opportunity, and wellness for people of limited economic means. And those are our members. You can check them out on our website. I think many of you may be familiar. They work in different geographies, but all of them work multi-jurisdictionally across the country. You can go to the next slide. SAFE originally started back in 2003 as a voice for our members at a national level, thinking about how do we talk about policy issues for private owners of affordable housing, private affordable rental housing, that has a sort of distinct mission and a distinct voice from some of the other kinds of housing voices that are here in Washington, D.C. And from that policy work, I think one of the things that makes things SAFE kind of unique is that it's where sort of policy and practice really meet. We really try to think about taking lessons from our members from the ground up and how do we use that to inform policy. But we also developed a number of other areas that we work on, including our energy and water work, our resident outcomes initiative, really looking at the intersections of health and housing, and more recently we've developed a certification program that looks at the ability and infrastructure to provide resident services coordination. And we can go to the next slide. And for those who are on the webinar today who aren't familiar with service-enriched housing or resident services, what we're talking about is how do we use housing as a platform in addition to providing a safe, decent, affordable place to call home. We're also thinking about how does that platform be used to leverage other kinds of success for residents. And so all of our members provide some sort of resident services programming or service-enriched housing, and that can take a lot of different forms. Sometimes it's the provision of actual programs and services on site. It's almost always the inclusion of some sort of site resident services coordinator who connects residents, families to other kinds of programs and services in the community. And our outcomes initiative has 5 impact areas that we identified: work, income, and assets, housing stability, community engagement, health and wellness, and youth and education. And the goal of the Outcomes Initiative was sort of first and foremost as it began to identify best practices, build partnerships. How do you leverage what different groups are thinking about and learning so it doesn't have to be created, as you go. We can really share and improve the practice and capacity across the field. And one of the missing ingredients was thinking about how do you tell this story and how do you demonstrate the impact of service-enriched housing. And so that's really where SAFE's Outcomes Initiative was born from. And so we do a data collection initiative, which started 5 years ago. We've had 5 rounds of data, and we collect data across all of these impact areas, including education. And I think the goal of that is, to transform from this anecdotal success to this sort of broader system of consistent assessment, to try to provide support for different kinds of policy changes, to expand support for resident services. to continue to use data to drive how we think about partnership development and program development and understand what is working well. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Nicole Manchester, who's really going to talk a little bit more about some of the specific initiatives of our members around youth and education.
Hi, everyone. This is Nicole Manchester. So just to, the world of affordable housing is a little complicated. And just to be clear, the SAFE members are separate from public housing. So this is distinct from, public housing provided by a city or a state. These are private, all of our members are nonprofit organizations providing affordable housing, in various jurisdictions. And so as part of the service-enriched housing, the SAFE members do a variety of different kinds of programs and services targeted towards youth. They do tutoring, they do after-school programs, summer camps, youth leadership programs. It really runs the gamut of all different kinds. When possible, they try to use evidence-based curriculums. For example, the after-school kids science program and curriculum is one program that one of our members are using. It's developed by the Center for the Collaborative Classroom. So they really, with an eye towards programs that work well in a housing setting, they feel that reaching people where they live is an effective way to do many of these programs. However, they really struggle with trying to collect outcomes data to assess the impact of their programs that in a really rigorous, in a reliable way. They, if you're asking parents about academic outcomes for their students, it's hard to get, that kind of high quality information about attendance scores or test scores or anything like that. So to try to tackle that issue, some SAFE members have started thinking about how they can partner with school districts to get academic outcomes information for the students they're serving directly from the school system. So we can go to the next slide there. So one example of this is the Chapin Hall Collaborative in Chicago. So SAFE is a membership. So we have 4 members that have family properties that are serving youth in Chicago. And so we identified this opportunity in Chicago. So Chapin Hall is a research institute out of the University of Chicago, and they have a lot of expertise in youth-related research. And so they decided to bring together these social service organizations in Chicago to give them access to public school data. It's been going for a few years now. There's about 9 or 10 organizations that are part of this collaborative. Some examples are on the left there. There's Chicago Public Library, After School Matters, the Chicago Housing Authority, SAFE is a member, and it's really an opportunity for these organizations, these nonprofit organizations serving youth, to get stuff like attendance scores and test scores, and they do like a student survey to get this high quality data to try to start to look at the impact of the programs that they're doing. So we can go to the next slide. So this is an example of some of the data that we've gotten as part of the Chapin Hall Collaborative. It's a little bit dense, this slide, but I'll just kind of give a brief overview. We have test scores. This is the NWEA, is a standardized test in Chicago. And so like I said, we have 4 members that are doing, that have family properties and serving youth in Chicago. We've masked their names, so just member A, B, C, D there. And these are the test scores for their youth. So the blue bars are reading scores, the green bars are math, as percentage meets exceeds in the on grade levels for each of those. And the nice thing about Chapin Hall is that they are able to provide data on school-based peers. So this is a nice comparison group of the same students. So the students that are attending the same schools as SAFE member youth as the SAFE students. So it's a nice comparison group there. And so, for example, for member A, you can see that the SAFE students' test scores are well below their school-based peers. So that's obviously an issue for them. But for member B, their standardized test scores are well above their school-based peers. So it's just a nice comparison point for them. We can move on to the next slide. So we also get data over time. So we've received data for the last 3 years. This is for 2015 through 2017. And just briefly, this is showing change over time in test scores. So this is, again, the standardized test scores in math and reading, and it's broken down for each of our members. And so members can compare themselves against each other as other affordable housing developers, or, can look at themselves how they've changed over time. And so there's just different ways that they can slice the data. It's just a really rich data set that we have access to. So we can keep going. Next slide. Yeah. And so another thing about this that we've been thinking about with this project is Chicago is a school choice environment where students can apply to attend different schools across the city, and safe members have properties across the city as well. And so an area that Chapin Hall has been able to help us with has been figuring out where our students are attending school, which schools they're going to, and if there are opportunities to help parents figure out what are the best schools for their kids to attend. Are there different educational outcomes for certain students attending certain schools? So, students that are attending school further, they're traveling further to go to school, are they having worse outcomes and maybe lower attendance than students that are going to schools closer? Questions about school quality. Those are all things that Chapin Hall is helping us to solve for. And so last slide here. So these are a couple other projects, data sharing projects with school systems that our members have been a part of. So I think I'm out of time, so I won't go into detail here, but just as more examples. And yeah, that's it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexandra and Nicole. And we'll be coming back to y'all for some questions as we get more into the 90 minutes. So I'm going to turn it over now to Clare Rosenberger with NeighborWorks America. She's going to talk a bit about NeighborWorks' work across the country and also in particular NeighborWorks organizations to advance the education and housing nexus. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting us to be a part of this. We're really excited to participate and to engage with your membership and with all of our peers as well. My name is Clare Rosenberger. I'm the Director of Real Estate Programs at NeighborWorks America. I'm in Washington, D.C., but our organization is a national organization, and we have offices around the country and represent and work with a network of about 250 local organizations. We can go to the next slide. We're a 40-year-old organization that was founded and funded by Congress. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we really are focused on making every community in our country a place of opportunity. We have about 250 members there in every state, DC and Puerto Rico. Our members are, we can see that they own real estate, rental properties, they develop for sale homes, they counsel home buyers, both existing and potential home buyers. They work with them on financial literacy. They do a lot of community building and engagement and resident engagement, and really focus on areas of health and employment and education. So their work runs the gamut of community development, and we work to support them through grants, through peer exchange and technical assistance, and a lot of evaluation tools and access to training. So we can go to the next slide. So just as a lead into this, within the real estate part of it, obviously we're working with within our network of about 250 organizations, roughly 135 of them are within our real estate multifamily initiative, which is where they own rental real estate properties in affordable housing. And they own about 172,000 units at this point, serving about 269,000 people. And so our resident services work has always fallen within that space, knowing that we're delivering these services on properties, or our organizations are delivering services on their rental properties to support their residents and their own personal goals. So our education programs, this one specifically, our after-school program, and thinking about an after-school programs at our affordable rental communities, within our network really started a while ago. This specific project started in about 2015. And with our support and with our partnership with one of our network organizations, Community Housing Works out of San Diego, we sought a consultant to really hire and find the top national plug-and-play language arts software programs. We knew we wanted to help our affordable rental communities deliver effective after-school programs to the youth on their sites. And we thought about the qualities of those on-site after-school programs. We know our organizations vary in size, in capacity, in budget, and level of services, and also in how they're delivering their after-school programs. So we really identified a few characteristics of what after-school programs should look like on these sites and could look like in terms of how we're thinking about how to better support them and really find a cohort within our large network of how to support them effectively and engage them on deepening their practice and driving toward outcomes to benefit their residents. So those, you all can read on the page. I don't have to read all them all to you, but the next slide, we really also thought about what are the other elements, not just facilities-wise, but thinking about what are some of the quality after-school programs that we could really kind of reinforce and support with our programs. And so as we were forming a cohort of organizations within our network, our peer learning cohort, we really thought about having our members really adopt all 7 of these elements of these high quality after school programs. We knew that, some would be building up their capacity to deliver them, and we knew that we would also need to assist them in this practice as well as the actual software plug and play. So we can go to the next slide. As we were working with this consultant, they were working on finding those top national plug and play language arts software programs to really assist these after school programs. And the consultant and the team found 18 software programs, and really out of those, 4 met most of the rubric criteria they had laid out in their evaluation. 2 were tested, and then iReady was actually selected with the highest approval from student engagement, staff ease of use, which is a big consideration of ours, and that our staff capacities can vary throughout our network, and really the reporting features that enabled. In 2015, we started working with Community Housing Works out of San Diego and Foundation Communities out of Austin, Texas. And they were our founding members. And they've been working with us closely and with a consultant to understand how this could work for them and how to start utilizing the iReady software with their after-school programs in their properties. This year, for this school year, but with our grant support, in fiscal year 2019, we were able to expand our cohort membership to include the other organizations you can see on the screen. AHC is a owner in Arlington, Virginia, and Baltimore, Maryland. Eden Housing is out of the Bay Area in California. People's Self-Help Housing is also in California. NeighborWorks Blackstone River Valley, NW stands for NeighborWorks, sorry about that. Blackstone River Valley is in Rhode Island, in Woonsocket, and Alamo Community Group is out of Texas. So we looked across and found 4 states to work in. We were looking at a total of 62 sites and really engaging with 1,100 students among those sites. And we really selected them with we were looking for organizations with existing after-school programs with about 100 students or more, and willing to use this iReady as a tool to measure reading and after-school program metrics. They also needed to be willing to administer parent, student, and staff surveys and be willing to be a part of this learning community using housing as a platform for academic success. The learning community itself is really not only engaging and utilizing the iReady software platform, but really engaging with each other. We know that deploying these new softwares and the software programs in after-school programs there's a learning curve involved for all of us, for our staff on site, and for the families and communities. So they leverage their connections with each other as well as a professional consultant who can work with them on how to address some of their more pressing challenges. We can go to the next slide. So in the first year, the group really focused on having staff getting comfortable with the software, getting students engaged, and testing incentives. And as we're expanding this year, the group really plans on using the diagnostic results to focus on individualized instruction. Some of our organizations are testing using complementary reading and literacy programs to support the love for reading. And the software provides this opportunity to tailor the individual lesson plans by adding lessons, adjusting the grade based on domain, or accessing curricula to offer small group lessons. iReady also has math accessible, and so after this year, this year, a few of the members will maybe test out the use of that with their students that are reading at grade level and above. And math is also set up with adaptive diagnostics and offers individualized lessons based on student placement. So we can see that our organizations are really looking at their adaptive diagnostic platform to understand where their students are and then measure progress over the school year. We can go to the next slide. So we're excited that, we've got some interesting year to date as we're onboarding all of our new members. But as we have started with this current school year, our 7 members are currently administering diagnostics using best practices. And those best practices are that they're administering these diagnostics, this diagnostic evaluation 2 weeks within the start of the school year. And then there's a diagnostic window of about 21 days, and including 12 weeks in between their diagnostic evaluations. So the goal is to have 3 of these collected during the year. And so that with growth monitoring and understanding that these are 15-minute quizzes in the in-between months. It really helps the after-school program staff focus on the needs of their students and engage with them deeply about what grade level they are at throughout the year. And so our current numbers are that we have 49%, or about 235 of our K through 4 ended the school year, I guess, last year reading at grade level or above, which is a 20% increase from the baseline. And that meant, I think there was also a total of 99 students closed their reading gap, with 58 students improving by 1 grade level and 41 students improving by 2 or more grade levels. And specifically, third graders, 46% ended their school year reading at or above grade level. And we were really excited by these results. Our network organizations who are leading this were incredibly excited by these results and are really encouraged to continue using this platform and their properties. We are, as of this morning for this school year, for the 2019-2020 school year, 972 students are enrolled in iReady, and 71% of those students have completed the diagnostic, and 6% have these flags on the diagnostic for acceleration. At this point, the diagnostics are showing that 15% are reading at Tier 1, 39% at Tier 2, and 46% at Tier 3, which means they're 2 or more grade levels below the needed grade level reading. Go ahead, the next slide. So when we were thinking about understanding how our network has been engaging with this platform and understanding how it's really benefited their after-school programs, our team has been trying to unpack a bit of that secret sauce. What's going on at these organizations? How are their communities responding so positively to this? And what does that look like, and how can we continue to replicate it? As a national network, we're really concerned and focused on that, and want to make sure that we are thinking about scale and how to introduce this to other properties and other sites. So as you can see on the screen, there is the secret sauce of putting together these programs. There is really the focus on realizing that coming home to support on their properties is both fun and skilled and focused on their individualized student plans. They really had that time on task of 45 minutes in terms of focusing with the iReady platform. And they were measuring the number of lessons taken and passing rate. And so this has been really important for them, but also engaging with each other in a peer-to-peer format in our network continues to be really supporting their success. And so part of that secret sauce in our network tends to be, as they engage with their programs, they engage with each other, and they engage and exchange best practices. And then our network, our consultant continues to work closely with iReady to think about how to continue to support our after-school program staff and how they can continue to support the success of their programs on site. And I believe that's my last slide, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. And I think some of the themes you heard from Claire, particularly around kind of what's that secret sauce, what are the real ingredients of success, I'm hoping we can come back to, as well as the role of national intermediaries in fostering network learning, which is something that the campaign thinks a lot about. And you know, we're hoping we can bring that up again as the rest of the 90 minutes takes place. So with that, I'm going to turn over the microphone to Jennifer Peck and Jenny Hicks with Partnership for Children and Youth and with House Ed. And they're going to talk a bit about the exciting work that they're doing with their networks and to foster this housing education connection. So to the both of you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you for including us today. So the Partnership for Children and Youth is a California-based intermediary, and our driving focus is making sure that kids who are furthest from opportunity and those living in the most under-resourced communities have access to high-quality learning opportunities during those critical hours when they are not in school. And this is our focus because kids spend about 80% of their waking hours outside of school. And we know from a huge amount of research and experience that the way kids are supported during those hours, the adults that they interact with, the opportunities that they're given, has a huge amount to do with their school and life outcomes. So as an intermediary organization, we tackle this challenge from multiple connected angles. We provide training and technical assistance to those who are providing these services on the ground in order to improve the quality of the programming, because we know that quality is critical to impact. And we also advocate for public funding and public policies that support and resource these critical after-school and summer learning programs for kids. And then we also use communication strategies and partnerships to raise awareness about what's working so that we can scale solutions that are being developed on the ground. And for the first decade or so of our work here in California, we were primarily focused on supporting these programs at schools, and we're working largely through the education system. And then a little bit by accident, we discovered housing through a local funder here in California. And we discovered that many affordable housing providers were offering some kind of out-of-school time programming for kids, but doing so with very little support or training around how to do it really well and in a way that would keep kids coming consistently and was really connected to school success. So we saw this as an enormous opportunity to reach a group of young people that we weren't previously reaching in our work, who have enormous needs and also enormous potential. So we adapted what we knew and were doing from our work in the school system around these programs and created this model called House Ed, which provides training and technical assistance and coaching and peer networking and leadership development to housing organizations so that they can get really good at offering these programs for young people of all ages. And this work started here in the Bay Area, which is where we are based. And then we discovered there was a lot of need and interest for this, so it spread across California and is now, over the past year, been moving to other places around the country. And as a result of that, we've been developing some tools that we hope are going to be beneficial to the field at large that we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation that Jenny will talk about. And as you'll hear from Jenny, who's really been the leader in growing House Ed, this work has evolved in a lot of interesting ways over the years based on the needs and the opportunities that we have discovered and the ways these programs can have impact with family engagement and school attendance and literacy, et cetera. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny to tell you a little bit more about what we've been working on.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to switch it up a little bit because as Jennifer said, we are really an intermediary, and I'm really excited, Jill, for you doing exactly what you were doing. I was just about to say that. If you haven't put out there yet who you are, where you're from, and what you hope will be different for kids as a result of providing youth services, go ahead and put that out there. As intermediaries, it's really important for us to hear from you, and that's exactly what PCY has done through the House Ed initiative. As Jennifer mentions, we have 3 major focus areas that we support housing in. One is around continuous system of learning. And we do that first by asking housing agencies, why do you even want to do youth services? What do you want to be different for your communities, for your youth, your families, for your staff, for yourself, for your organization as a result of offering youth services? And then we help them assess their current reality and create an action plan, and then provide coaching, training, and resources, as Jennifer mentioned, to help them move towards the goals that they've set. We also foster collaboration. One of my favorite things, we offer networking meetings where there's 13 to 15 housing agencies, hundreds, 150 members who come together 2 to 4 times a year to talk about challenges, but most importantly, to share resources, to share what's working and what's not working, and to really begin to help each other make the communities that we're all dreaming and working towards creating. We also build leadership. If you go to our website, you'll notice that most of the housing agencies who are with us have been with us for 3 to 5 to 7 years. We had the wonderful opportunity a couple of weeks ago to visit one of those sites, Eboltzi in Oakland, California, under Michelle Sitt. And she showed us a youth who had started her program 7 years ago when she became a member of the cohort. And she showed us how the services she provided to that youth, now that that youth is now a teenager, they're now running a reading club for other teenagers. And it was really impactful. And she showed us that being part of this cohort allowed her to sustain. She also mentioned her challenges as a leader running program and the ups and downs she went through, but having a network, a peer group of other housing agencies who could share what they've been going through and learn from each other, she stayed. And as a result, she's now providing a program that serves 0 to age 24. Not only do we do continuous learning and fostering collaboration and building leadership, next slide, we also develop resources. And one of those resources we developed was the California Department, we partnered with the California Department of Education to develop quality standards. And really that was rooted in the fact that housing agencies, whether they were big or small, whether they were running a program 1 day a week and they had only $10,000 for the whole year to run program at that site, or they were running program 4 to 5 days a week and they had over $100,000 at a site, they all came down to realize that we have to create a common language around what quality looks like and feels like. And as a result of that, we came up with 12 standards. I'm going to switch it up a little bit from my peers, and we're going to dive a little deep into one of the standards that we've been working on, because one of the other things that PCY does as an intermediary is we broker resources and we partner with other intermediaries and other experts. That's one great thing I want to put a plug out there. If you haven't partner with your local intermediary who can provide TA, they often have many different people you can connect with. One of those we connected with was High Expectation, ran by Tanae Wheeler, who's the executive director there. And her story is that she was a teacher and a parent, and she was struggling as a teacher advocating for her own child as their parent. And she realized if she was struggling as a teacher, that those who are not in education were probably experiencing even more hard time navigating through the system and figuring out how to support their kids. So she came and ran a cohort with about 10 housing agencies. They attended 3 sessions, 4 hours each, and each of those agencies got about 5 hours of individual coaching. She began to teach us what family engagement is, and she said family engagement is a way that a child's adult caretaker, biological parent, foster parent, sibling, grandparent, at home, at school, and in the community, which is who we are, effectively support learning and healthy development. Next slide. We worked with this particular consultant because one of the things she does, she had a record of success. She was part of the HOPE SF work. Some of you may be familiar with this. It was brokering resources from education, housing, and many other resources. But the work she particularly did was very holistic. She began to work on supporting schools and engaging with their local housing, so understanding the importance to engage with local housing providers. She worked with resident service coordinators in housing to help them create an environment that would be welcoming to both the school and the families. But most important, she had strategies and skills that really engaged families and taking a real step forward in supporting their own child's academic success. And they saw reading at home increase, participating in school meetings and events and activities increase, and most importantly, increasing school day attendance as well. Next slide. Through her work, we had already developed standards, and we realized also it was really great to partner with her because her philosophy really aligned to what we believe our quality standard, which is that programs use strength-based strategies to partner with families and manage and sustain their child's learning and healthy development. This is really critical for us because we are not going in to provide all the resources to housing, and we do not support housing in doing that. We support them in building the development of children and families so that they can stand on their own. And that is really what we've done. And through our standards, we've also developed some case studies, as Jennifer mentioned, other resources we have, which are really housing agencies who stopped and said, you know, these standards that are developed, they shouldn't just sit on the shelf, but that we've actually used them. And this is the results we've had out of them. And so one of the organizations we want to highlight today is Palo Alto Housing, next slide, who developed a reading club. And in this reading club, they took the skills they had learned from the cohort around what is reading, and they use these 3 E's, which is educate, encourage, and empower. They also use resources they got from the cohort to help actually build relationships with their local with their local teachers. So the really beautiful part about this was they actually have teachers who come down to their site once a month, rooted in a theme. Rooted in a theme, and then that theme is we're able to give parents tools and resources to begin to support their youth. We begin to do things like they're tracking reading and confidence of parents. Next slide. Now, I probably can go on and on and on about this particular program and all the great work they're doing, but I really just wanted to read a quote from a family member I feel that sums it up. And really, like I mentioned to you, they were kind of doing things a little different with their family engagements. They're kind of just really resident service coordinator meetings where they come in and families talk about what's working and not working in their communities. But they began to switch up their approach with these events. And instead, they started to empower and give resources to their families, but then also allowing their families to take the lead in supporting their young people within their community. And one of the parents said, "I want to thank you so much for this amazing approach. You guys are working really hard for our families, and the reading club is just amazing. We love it. My boys love it. And we love the cooking book. We've already tried 2 recipes. It's so much fun getting to do something new, healthy at the same time. So the kids will try it. Thank you very much for everything, and we'll make sure to mark our calendars and attend the next reading session." I think that kind of says it all. Next slide. PCY has been definitely committed to building the capacity of housing agencies. We've been doing this for about 10 years, and we've developed observation tools, we've developed standards, we've developed resources and ways to provide coaching and training. But most important, we really want to build the capacity of housing agencies to stand on their own and to really hold the place for young people to be successful. Next slide. And one of those agencies is Eden Housing. As Jennifer mentioned, we started this 10 years ago from a founder, but we also started it from a housing agency where Linda Manalini, the executive director of Eden Housing, had came to us and said, "Can you broker some of those great resources you've been doing at the school sites for our housing sites?" And at that time, when we first started with Eden in 2010, there was only one coordinator, that was Vanessa Hernandez, who was running program. And over time, that group grew into about 3 to 4 or 5. And by year 2018, her cohort not only consisted of members running direct program, but it consisted of the VP, of their policy rep, and even board members were now coming to cohort meetings. Next slide. But truthfully, the heartbeat of their work was the improvements they saw over time. So I can't stress enough about that housing's most important role is development. I don't know about y'all, but over here in California, for Eden Housing example, they have 20,000 people on the wait list, which means the first thing they care about is development. But they still have families in there who are in need of resources. So having access to an intermediary who can provide training and coaching for free or low cost has been very valuable. And as a result, they've seen growth. They went from running 2 programs to running 36 programs. They went to supporting 200 youth to now supporting 425 youth. They went from 2 part-time youth specialists to now 2 full-time youth specialists, 5 full-time resident service coordinators, and 6 community-based organization-led sites. They also provide over 160 hours of professional development. And most important, they saw the biggest shift is when they participated in the family engagement cohort, where they went from 4 family events that they were doing across their whole portfolio to now 76 family events they do a year across their whole portfolio. Next slide. The work we've done has, as Jennifer mentioned, is now gone nationally. We have had the wonderful opportunities through the funders of Housing Opportunity, as Jill mentioned earlier, to spread our work across the nation. We've partnered with organizations like Schools Out Washington, who not only provides TA and coaching as well to their housing organizations in Seattle, Washington, but they also have their own network called HELO, which is Housing Expanded Learning Opportunity. I stopped for a moment because I want to give them a little praise, because we got an opportunity to coach them, support them. They came out and saw our cohort. They met with some of our steering committee members. And then they went back and launched their own network, where they too bring together people about 4 times a year. But within their first year, it took us 5 years, within their first year, they hosted a meeting where they had principals and school district representatives and housing agencies all in one room, talking about the kids that they're supporting and thinking about how they're gonna work together to move things forward. So really, through the support of working together and brokering resources, we've been able to see that this model is really growing. I tell people all the time, it's not a moment, it's definitely movement, and we're all taking it. So for that, I just want to take a moment, next slide, and bring back Jennifer Peck to the space to talk a little bit about resources. But one thing I do want to share with you is that my business partner, Vanessa Hernandez, has brokered some family engagement resources that we want to make sure you guys have access to, because she has some tools and resources she's developed that went from 4 sites to 4 events to 76 events. And we want to make sure you guys have access to that, because that's what we do here at PCY.
Thanks, Jenny. And I think the only thing I have to add to that is that the quality standards that Jenny referenced are currently available on our website, and some of the other tools like the self-assessment tool that we've been developing, the case studies that Jenny referenced, and some training modules. That's all stuff that's going to be coming out a little bit later this fall, and we're going to be sure to get that out through all these networks.
Support the kind of work that you all do on the ground in different, either on the education side or on the housing side, or both, pilots, standards, technical assistance, training, access to what works, and giving you all a chance to network with each other. And I think, and there's more, but I'm hoping these different presentations kind of lift up some of the ways that SAFE, I'll talk about housing is in a minute, PCY, House Ed, NeighborWorks are offering those different kinds of opportunities to their members and to the wider public. So I'm going to talk a bit on behalf of Abra Lyons-Warren, who's not able to be on this call, about CLAFA's Housing Is initiative, which is a cross-sector initiative between housing, education, and health. This presentation focuses on their housing and education connection and series of partnerships and resources, but they do also have a wider focus on health as well. So you can go to the next slide. So CLAFA is a national nonprofit organization. They have members all over the country. It is member-based. Typically, their members are from larger organizations, the cities here that are listed as well as others. And CLAFA's work to create and strengthen partnerships between the housing and education sector which is part of the Housing Is initiative, comes from the notion that we can't solve issues associated with poverty from acting in silos. And I think all of us on this call would agree with that. That strengthening partnerships is designed to really bridge sectors and make all of our efforts more effective and powerful. It helps us not create the same, it helps us not continue to kind of have the same problems or have the same brakes on progress, and really try to see what works and replicate that and scale that possibly through the larger national connections that we all have and that these associations and intermediaries are able to bring together. It also allows sectors to combine resources and become more nimble in our resource-constrained environment. CLAFA and the Housing Is initiative works from prenatal all the way up to seniors. This particular conversation has been more focused on 0 to 8 just because of the nature of where the campaign focuses. But I think many of these initiatives, as you've heard, in different associations and intermediaries, are working across a P to 16 platform, and that's the case for Housing Is as well. You don't have to be, one thing Abra did want me to definitely say is you don't have to be a large public housing authority to be successful in this work, or a large affordable housing organization in the case of other groups. It's really about forging partnerships, and what Housing Is tries to do is to create partnerships where they don't exist and to strengthen them where they do. You can go to the next slide. There's a lot of resources that I just want to call attention to on the Housing Is website. We're going to be sending a post-webinar set email out to all of our people that are on this call and that RSVP'd. And there are several resources that I would really encourage you to look at from the Housing Is website, including data sharing agreements. There's case studies, there's publications. I know there's people on this call right now who have submitted and published research and work that is on the Housing Is website. So if you're one of those people, I was looking through it and I saw some names that I knew and that I knew would be on this call. I'd also want to call out the Housing Is Summit, which is taking place, the next one on April 30th and May 1st, 2020. In Washington, D.C. If you haven't already been to a Housing Is Summit, it really is a very high energy and highly impactful opportunity to network across sectors, and it's something that CLAFA and Housing Is really becoming known for, and several of the people on this call have also been speakers at the Housing Is conferences and summits in the past. You can go to the next slide. A few things Abra wanted me to mention here in the kinds of ways that housing and education partnerships can help kids. Can be through stability, and I think you've heard a bit of that either inferenced or explicitly referenced on this call, that affordable housing supplied by housing authorities and by nonprofit affordable housing organizations, as in the case for other people that are speaking here, provides stability, which helps children stay in the same school, which helps their own and other students' educational achievement. So stability is key, access is key. Affordable housing organizations and housing authorities have access to students in a way that schools do not necessarily, particularly in that out-of-school time and in that longer term relationship between parents and kids. Engagement is another area that I think is very important that Abra wanted me to list. Housing authorities are in a unique position to engage with parents and young kids before they are school aged, particularly during the 0 to 5 age, and that developmental period is so critical. There's actually an article on the Housing Is website that talks about educational differences that can begin to be seen as early as age 7, and I know even earlier based on housing stability. So I think that the ability to engage with families in a 2-generation approach in those early years is really critical. Place-based initiatives can be offered at housing authorities and at affordable housing organizations. Housing authorities are places for activities that promote positive educational outcomes like after-school and summer programming, and improved outcomes, as you've heard from others on this line today. Out-of-school programs, after-school programs, family engagement programs, literacy-based proven programs provide access to academically enriching activities that close the racial achievement gap and the academic achievement gap as well, particularly between higher and lower income families. And this very much aligns with the campaign's look at education, school readiness, out of school time as three of the pillars to really impacting the gap between literacy levels for those who are lower income and the more affluent peers. You can go to the next slide. So CLAFA has partnerships all over the country and works happening all over the country. CLAFA has seen especially promising practices in places like Vancouver, Seattle, King County, Tacoma, Washington, Fresno, Oakland, LA, Denver, Milwaukee, Akron, Ohio, and Cuyahoga, Cleveland area, Ohio, Chicago, New Haven, Atlanta, Durham, San Antonio, and Austin. And Abra's contact info, along with all of our speakers, her email is on the speaker bios. She would be more than happy to interact with anyone on this call to talk more about some of the work that's going on in those areas around the country. And she'd love to hear about work that's happening in your parts of the country. If you're not a CLAFA member, that could inform the knowledge sharing that CLAFA has with its member organizations. You can go to the next slide. So these are just some of the ways that housing organizations are connecting across sectors into education, through partnerships, through having more connections around a community of practice, and that's something that the campaign talks a lot about as well. And all of this creates multiplier effects, as she says here. By improving educational success, kids will be able to have other health, developmental, academic, economic mobility outcomes that can really impact their trajectory and reduce the prevalence of generational poverty, which at the end of the day is something the campaign is at the foundation of the campaign's work, and I think is at the foundation of many, if not all, of the work of the people that are on this line and the people that are listening in. You can go to the next slide. These are just some of the ways that CLAFA members are working with education partners locally and at the national level. I mentioned some of the local groups earlier on. Abra specifically calls out here Akron, Portland, and King County. And nationally, I think you're hearing some themes on this call about ways that intermediaries and associations can further this cross-sector work nationally. I mentioned some of these already. For anyone who hasn't gone on the Housing Is website and wasn't able to attend their summit in May of 2019, they have videos of their plenary and breakout sessions. They have the agenda. They have some of the major discussion points that came out of the two-day conference. So I'd encourage you to go on their website to learn more, including a presenter affiliated with the Raj Chetty work on creating moves to opportunity that I think may be an area that the campaign is going to want to be lifting up in a future housing partner webinar. So I'd encourage you to look there. You can go to the next slide. And lastly, one of the other ways that I think intermediaries and associations nationally can advance the cross-sector work that you've heard about today is through publications and through resources that are disseminated in a variety of different channels and through different communications mechanisms. This report, the Up and Down the I-5 Corridor, is a multimedia publication that provides tools on how to create and sustain an effective partnership. And I encourage you all to look at it if you haven't already. You can go to the next slide. So this is Abra's email. She wanted me to make sure her last message was really around breaking down silos. I hope that that's been a theme for our last hour, and in the coming half an hour, we'll be looking at that even further. I know Abra, again, wishes she could be here. She sends her best, and I hope that I did her justice well in presenting the really good work that CLAFA and the Housing Is initiative has been able to advance and accelerate across its network and across the country. So we are now, if all the panelists wanted to set their videos, I am going to pose a couple questions to them, and then we want to open it up to all of you. And if you haven't already put a question into the chat box, I'd really encourage you to do so. We are going to have some dedicated time to answer your questions in this last half hour. So I'm hoping that there'll be some there that we can draw from. So don't be shy. And if you haven't listed your name, your organization, and the group that you're, or the place that you're with, please put that in there too, so we can get a better sense of who's on the line. I think we have all our speakers except for our SAFE folks on the video. So if you can hop on the video, Jennifer, Alexandra and Nicole, that would be great, and we can have you on as well. Or Alexandra and Nicole, I think I may have said Jennifer. So I want to pose my first question to Jenny. So Jenny, if you can guess, I know, so flattered. I'm going to pose my first question to Jenny. So just to make sure she's off of mute and you can see her. So this question is, and then the other panelists can hop in with responses as well. So Jenny, we've all been working together to think through how to best collect and measure consistent outcomes related to early school success. This has been a big part of what House Ed has been convening us to try to start thinking about doing as national associations and intermediaries. What excites you about the potential for consistent outcomes across these different networks that we've been hearing from today? And what do you see as making that challenging?
Well, I'm hoping what excites people is actually listening to each of the presentations. I mean, one of the main reasons we got together was because we're all serving housing in very different, unique ways, but somewhat similar. As you mentioned, we have some similar goals that we're achieving for, attendance, expanded learning, family engagement, but doing in unique ways. And I'm most excited because it's just the fact that now the housing communities I'm working with get to hang out and work with you all and have opportunities, have access to resources you all. I think it's really important when, again, I mentioned earlier that, for us, housing's #1 goal is development. And then their goal is to support those who are in their communities, but they can't do that alone. And it really requires intermediates like ourselves to come in and provide support in any way we can. But even us, we can only do so much ourselves as well. So being able for us to collaborate as it begins to broker and expand the resources available to those that are on the webinar today as well, we hope. And so that's our long-term goal, is to continue thinking about how we're going to work together to do that. I think the challenge is that we all do serve very unique communities. I think we've discovered, even when we did across the map, that we're not all serving the same communities, which is a great thing. It means that we can spread, but it also means that, what we all stand for is from the ground up. And it's really identifying what does our communities need and how is it going to best support them and moving things forward. So the challenge we all have is to identify ways that we can work together to support them, but still continue to gather the voice of those that we're working with and for, and engage them in this process, and to be open and flexible to kind of shift things so that they make sure that whatever we're coming up with meets their needs, as well as begins to be something that they can create and make it their own, so that we know it sustains, which is what we do as intermediaries, right? So, thanks.
Jennifer, Peck, do you want to add anything just as the PCY half of the work that we've been doing with House Ed on looking at consistent outcomes and how to measure them and metrics across these different associations and groups?
I'm not sure I have anything to add on the measurement piece exactly. I just wanted to echo something Jenny said about the value of the organizations working in this space, getting better at sharing information about what each of us is doing out there in the field, because, we are all serving a particular section of this broader sector. And we've developed some things that are valuable, some others have developed things that are valuable, and we're going to serve each of our constituencies a whole lot better if we have more resources and tools to draw from. On the outcomes side, I do think there's some very important things we know from a lot of research over a lot of decades that has been highlighted earlier today around the importance, for example, of reading by the 3rd grade and some of the different factors that impact that. And I think we know enough now about the things that impact those outcomes that we can get even more focused. And we have a lot of assets right now around growing awareness about chronic absence and the importance of attendance, for example. It's now, part of accountability in federal law in the education system, and the fact that schools are much more aware and more focused on the importance of attendance, I think gives us a really good opening to have more dialogue with school systems about the role of housing. And that in particular, I think, is a place where we can collaborate more.
Yeah, we've had among our conversations, attendance has been an area that seems to be pretty galvanizing, and one that I think several of our at the national level, we're trying to look at across different associations and partnerships, and I'm imagining I'm sure at the local level as well. Any Claire or Nicole, Alexandra, if you're on the line, anything else you'd want to add regarding this question about what do you see as the potential around outcomes across our networks? Anything challenging across trying to really collect outcomes across our networks? All right. Oh, there's Claire.
I was going to say, I'll let Alexandra give them their outcomes initiative. It's very, yeah.
I think, from the SAFE perspective, this is really challenging work to figure out outcomes that are meaningful, reliable, that are easy as a housing provider to collect. We've experimented with a few different approaches, and, our kind of have thought that partnerships with school districts is a great way forward for certain areas that can make it work, like our work in Chicago. And we have a member that's like on my last slide that's exploring this in a few other cities as well, like Akron, Ohio, and Cincinnati, and other places. But that's not feasible for every single school district across the country. So
I think some of our other members also look at some of the other kinds of indicators that are sort of outside of the traditional education academic success, and that we all know to be foundational for family and child success, so, especially around housing stability and food security, some of these things that we know, if families and households are struggling with it, a houser is in a unique position to perhaps understand that, access that information, see families at their home, in their communities. So that's one place that our properties and our members have really started to drill down and think about how do they tell that story, how do they get that information, and how can they work with schools or educational partners to share that data, as Nicole said.
So even broader sectoral than just housing and education. I mean, then you start, even thinking about it more holistically.
I know that's maybe weird because you are leading, but you're also part of the collaborative. What's your take? Right. We can ask you that question too.
For me, I'll say just really quick, I would say in terms of consistent outcomes, one of the things the campaign has really thought about is the challenge around creating, particularly around like kindergarten readiness. Each state has different standards, each state has different tests. It's and then even at third grade reading, the way that you compare baseline to change over time could be local, it could be state, it varies. So I think that one thing we've really been thinking more about is how do you help coalitions or communities put their own stake in the ground? What is going to be measurable change for them, and how are they going to define that? And then how can you mobilize, accelerate, work with that coalition through networks, through best-in-class resources, through access to funding, and there's a question about financing mechanisms that we'll get to in a minute. How can you help them advance their own goals against their own benchmarks? So taking a more localized approach has been a way that the campaign has tried to do that towards an overall goal of closing the gap between literacy and school success levels for third graders versus their more affluent, low-income third graders versus the more affluent peers. So, I mean, I think that's kind of a nuance that I would say we've learned over time and that we've been working with our coalitions to address. I want to ask one more question to Claire. I'm interested in your perspective. What's one thing you're really excited about right now, either that's happening nationally to look at the housing education connection and early school success for kids that are bridging these silos between housing and education, or that's happening locally with one of your members that maybe you didn't have a chance to talk about, but that you're excited about and would want to share?
Sure. Thanks. I think, well, personally, nationally, we have a close partnership with both SAFE and are developing our close partnership with PCY. So I actually am thrilled about that. And it's something that when we think about, and just what you said, I mean, thinking about delivering services, supporting the services that are being delivered in our communities, it really is a local evaluation, and it's an organization by organization understanding of what they really can be doing at that time. And both of these partnerships are really exciting to us because they do help us meet our network where it is. Think about capacity, think about really enhancing the conversation with them. And I think something that the group that I was talking a little bit about, that they're really focused on, or kind of in partnership with others, is that they are trying to also think about kind of the operational side of it, of continuing to build capacity in their organizations and support it ongoing. We know that there's a lot of turnover challenges as we deliver our programs, and our network organizations do. And so thinking about potentially helping take some of the learnings and the information that's coming out of our current pilot and our learning community, and think about how to kind of create a toolkit for onboarding and for really standardizing that, so that the ramp up at organizations, whether it's for individuals coming into existing properties or thinking about as they're looking at expansion, is that learning curve is flattened a little bit, and for the organization is not as large of an investment. And that's what we're thinking of when we think of scale and we think of expanding within our network, given the potential our network has, is really important to us to pursue and support.
Yeah, that question of turnover is one that's come up a lot with the campaign, as well as we look at kind of what are some of the impediments to continuity at the local level. And at the national level too, right? Like, so how can you have the champion be more than just one? How can it really be something that's embedded in standards and practices, and kind of having that the kind of work that we're talking about be kind of infused into the organization, I think is a very critical ingredient of success. All right, I think what I want to do now is we're going to do a couple things simultaneously. We're going to dual track things for a minute. There's a poll that just popped up on your screen, which is a survey that we'd love for you to fill out as we enter into the last 15 minutes or so of our time. The other thing we want to do is give you a minute to type in any questions you have for the panelists. There's a couple of questions that have already been posed. I'll start with those, but I want to give you all about 30 seconds or so to type some questions in so we can build on that as we go. So I will give you all about 30 seconds to do the survey, to fill out the group chat with a question, and then I'll pose a couple questions to our panelists. Okay, so as you all type in questions, I want to start with the first question we got, which was from Matthew Alberti, and this was seconded by another person on the line. So the question, and I'll pose this looks like it's to everybody, so whoever of our panelists would like to jump in first, go for it. What financing mechanisms are you seeing that are most effective and enduring? Are the programs funded out of the development's operating budget or by school districts, or joint fundraising by intermediaries and partners? And the follow-up to that was, what kind of durable, sustainable funding strategies do you see, or do you want to put out as ideas for those on the line? And Nicole and Alexandra, we can't see you, so if you had wanted to respond, please jump in, or Claire, Jenny, Jennifer, go for it too.
So Alexandra and Nicole here, and I think that's always the top issue that comes up for our members, and I think across this field on the housing side, is this commitment to provide services in housing. How do you pay for it? Whether it's, you know, youth and education programs or health or, you know, housing stability. And the answer isn't a simple one. It's the reality is that organizations are cobbling together a variety of different kinds of financing. I'd say that to the extent where it is feasible, I think more and more developers are trying to figure out how to include it in property operations as being sort of the most, or one of the more sustainable sources, you know, so long as your property is performing well, that they can do that. But they're also looking to leverage their partners. They're looking for grants. They're looking for, some are looking for other kinds of equity investment, you know, where they're looking for social impact returns. I think that's a growing space. There's a growing conversation in sort of the intersection of health and housing about, is there a place where Medicaid or hospital systems might provide resources, especially as they continue down this path of embracing a social determinants of health perspective and recognizing that investing in youth and education is investing in health. You know, there's a specific initiative that we've engaged with Fannie Mae on, which they have a Healthy Housing Rewards initiative, which is for financing of resident services, and there's no restriction on what that money gets used for at the property as long as it's supporting services, and that's part of what our core certification is used for. It's an organization is demonstrating that capacity, but again, that's sort of one source of funding, but that's getting used to augment these other sources of financing and resources.
One other person want to weigh in on that?
I think, you know, Alex, you said it perfectly. It's not an easy answer. Most do all three. I was on the list. I'm like, they do all of them. But the most sustainable way is the internal operating budget. And I know that might seem strange, but, you know, Jennifer, you can step in too. We were part of the movement when there was a lot of funding that came in from foundations to after school programs. And we saw them exit, and we saw the struggle that went on as a result of them exiting, but then required PCY to step up and do some lobbying at the state level to bring some of those resources back. So I think it's a requirement of all of us. You know, we have some policy work we have to do. And then there's the foundations, like Alex is saying from SAFE, we're holding foundations accountable.
Nope. I think we lost Jenny, but we gained Alexandra and Nicole. So we see them, and Jenny, if you're able to call back in, we can definitely pick up where you left off. I would just add one quick thing I would say, and then I want to just quickly get to the second question that was posed, and then I have a closing question for the panelists. One of the things the campaign has really focused on is leveraging the relationship between local philanthropy and national philanthropy, and looking for opportunities for co-investment between local and national funders. All campaign coalitions are funded through local money, but one of the values we feel we can bring to the table, one of the value adds that we can bring to the table, is an opportunity to network between local and national philanthropy on issues that really require collective solutions and collective investment to solve local problems. And so this is an area that we really see as a key. The role of local philanthropy is one that we see as a real key audience for us. And we hope that one of the things we'd love to learn more about over time is kind of the way that local philanthropy impacts the work of these other associations that you've been hearing about today, and the kind of efforts that you're all promoting through your own networks. So one last question, real briefly, if there's maybe one person that would like to answer this, from Camille Seward, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. What supports do you all provide families in terms of navigating their way through housing barriers? So you're all representing national intermediaries. are there any kind of common supports or ways that you work with your groups to kind of help their families navigate barriers that they might be facing? That might be the question that I think would apply perhaps best to this audience, given that you're all national in nature. And Camille, I don't know if Suzanne, if my colleague is who's producing the call, if we can unmute Camille, and maybe he or she can explain more what kind of barriers was meant.
Certainly.
Camille, are you there?
Camille. She's unmuted. Camille, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I would say, Camille, what I can do after the call is get in touch with you and better understand the question that you're posing. And then I'm happy to, if it's okay with the panelists, I'd be more than happy to share that with you. Oh, can you all hear me? No, we can't hear you. But I'm happy to get a better understanding of what you mean and then send it to the panelists. And if you all can respond via email, then I can compile that and send that to Camille, if that's okay.
Okay, is this better? I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep, now we can hear you. Yep.
Yay. Okay, great. I was on my headphones, sorry.
That's okay.
Just to provide additional context, I work for a foundation that supports public schools in DC to engage with families. And one of the barriers that that every school has expressed having in common is housing. And so in DC, like the school system is pretty complicated in terms of you don't often go to school in the district in which you live. And so, it presents a barrier in terms of like getting around to different schools. And a lot of families are now being displaced as certain parts of the district are being gentrified. And so as they're being displaced and sent all across the nation with a housing voucher, schools are wondering how to support their families through this process.
Would anyone like to take a quick minute to try to address that?
I mean, I think so. For SAFE, we're working at a scale that we don't tend to get into those kinds of conversations quite as much because all of our members are working in a lot of different jurisdictions, and this is such a local issue. That being said, the members, and I certainly know this is true for CLAFA members, I can say that for Abra, they've been doing a lot of different initiatives and trying to engage local schools to try to educate the schools about sort of housers as partners in that. Because the waiting lists are very messy, complicated things to get into housing, and that is, again, a very local issue. There isn't a great solution sort of at the regional or national level, but it is a place where I think continued collaboration and partnership to try to identify where families are slipping through the cracks is a benefit to all the stakeholders involved.
Thank you, Camille. I'm really glad we could get your mic to work, and I really appreciate you asking the question, and it's a really important one. I know we're just about up on time. I just want to note a few things before we go to our last slide. There's been a few resources that folks have noted in the chat box that I will be combining into a email that will go out to all those that RSVP'd, along with some other resources that SAFE, NeighborWorks, CLAFA, and PCY and House Ed have offered. Jenny did want me to make sure you knew that state after-school networks are a really good resource around training and funding. So I will follow up with Jenny post-webinar, and if she has any more specific sites that she recommends you all look at, that would be another avenue to address the funding and financing question. And the last question I was, yes, and Jennifer Peck just added on this too. The question I was going to pose that I ran out of time to, which was this, and I may be asking my presenters to email me their thoughts to this question, and then I can compile them and send them out, which is, I was going to ask our presenters to share one question they would like you as participants to be trying to answer for yourselves as you look to advance the housing education connection in your community. So I'll give my presenters a tad bit of homework just to send me their thought on that, and I can compile them and send them out. And I know Jenny is sad that she had a computer issue, otherwise she would have certainly stayed on until the end. So you can go to the last slide. Thank you all so much. You will be hearing from me shortly with a summary of some of the resources and some other materials that may be of interest. I really want to thank all of our panelists, Alexandra, Nicole, Claire, Jennifer, Jenny, and Abra, for taking the time and for sharing their thoughts on this really important topic of breaking down silos and the ways that national intermediaries and associations can play a role in lifting up and supporting the work that happens on the ground with their own networks and in this these sectors as a whole. And then lastly, we have some upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. We offer webinars every Tuesday through the campaign on a variety of topics. These are some of the ones that are coming up, and we'll be certain to let you know about those and encourage you to RSVP. If you didn't already finish the poll, please do. We'll keep the webinar open for another minute or two for you to do that. And again, really want to thank Alexandra, Nicole, Claire, Jennifer, Jenny, for being here and for sharing the really important work of and Abra, for all the really important work you do nationally and that your members do across this country. So I think that culminates the webinar. Thank you all very much and have a very good rest of your days.
And thank you, Jill.
Thank you. Take care.